I'm just going to quickly grab a glass of water.
Of course.
Is that okay?
Mhm.
Go grab a fidget there. It's my new one of choice. I think last time I had was it oh my God, Max retrieved it for himself. It was a watermelon fidget.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. It is now in the possession of my youngest. It is now his. He likes to have them. Or my friend's little guy loved these ones. I had these at one of our hangout groups. Oh, where's the camera? They're kind of stretched. They're like little people. They're really cute. I like them, so I kept them for him in case he loses any of his for the next hangout group we're having. It's really cute.
Once Rachel's back, we might get started.
Yeah, for sure. I think she just had to do something there for a moment, I think.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Such a lovely evening, isn't it?
Mm.
Well, I should say that I'm in Mayo. Where are you based, Bridget?
Oh, I'm in Dublin. It's
It's
cleared up
nice.
down here as well.
Yeah, it's really nice, actually. It was very stormy earlier. We were in Sligo State for a little while. It was quite wet going down, so thankfully it's picked up.
Hello, sorry guys. I just knew if I didn't have a glass of water here, I'd be coughing halfway through or something.
Okay, so welcome to our webinar on adult friendships, fostering healthy relationships as an autistic adult. We're joined by SAM's own Amanda McGuinness, who does just about everything. She's the parent of 3 autistic children and 1 at least non-diagnosed child, and also runs Little Puddins. And Rachel O'Connor, who's worked with us on several webinars before. She's a psychologist who works for ACD&T. And I'm going to let them get started, but just before that, this is being recorded. It will be up on our YouTube by the end of the week, and we will have a period of Q&A at the end, but feel free to send in your questions, and I'll be monitoring them to put forward for the Q&A. So if you'd like to go ahead, I'll let you go.
Great, thank you so much. Okay. Okay, so yeah, Bridget already gave us a lovely introduction, but there we are now. So yeah, myself, Rachel, I'm a psychologist, and Amanda here is joining me today from As I Am. So we're very excited today to talk a little bit about the topic of friendship. So I suppose to give a bit of a sense of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk a bit about kind of friendship and I suppose different perspectives maybe on friendship and how different people perceive friendship and what they look to get out of friendship. And kind of a comparison maybe between autistic people and neurotypical people and their preferences and styles around friendship. And then I guess, you know, what can occur for a lot of autistic people is actually, you know, maybe some negative experiences within friendships and how that can cause traumatic experiences at times. So I suppose to maybe give you that sense, or maybe that little bit of a warning now, that we'll be touching on some potentially traumatic experiences that people might have had within their lives. So if you don't feel, you know, in a place to hear about that today, maybe save this for another time. It's going to be up on YouTube at a later point, and you can skip over bits you don't want to have a look at for the moment. But I suppose the reason that we wanted to look at these experiences was to support people, I guess, to maybe reflect on what could have been some hard experiences previously, and I guess have a lot of self-compassion, and I suppose a lot of kindness towards their younger self, or maybe even their current self, around what has happened within friendships. And then, you know, you'll see the final point there around kind of moving forward and kind of where to go from here. You know, understanding yourself, understanding what your preferences and styles are within friendship, and how to identify what is a healthy friendship as well. I suppose, yeah, trying to find those healthy relationships to support you thrive as you go forward. So we're gonna, yeah, first of all, have a little look at this definition of friendship. Initially I thought, okay, let's have a little look at what a neurotypical definition of friendship it might be, and see if an autistic uh, definition might be a little bit different. But actually having a look at this, I think, it's probably a definition that makes sense for a lot of people, maybe both autistic and neurotypical. So it says here that a friendship is a voluntary relationship between two or more people that's relatively long lasting. In which those involved tend to be concerned with meeting the other's needs and interests as well as satisfying their own desires. So I suppose, you know, um, we'll have a little look at in a minute at what, maybe the research tells us that autistic people tend to all say is important in friendship. But I know, those of you watching might have your own sense of it as well, of course. And Amanda will tell us a little bit about her perspective too. But I guess kind of that piece around meeting the needs of others and the interests of others. I think that stands for everybody, but what might be challenging in friendships between autistic and neurotypical people is that the needs and interests might actually be quite different. And for some people, they might not be totally aware of what their needs are, because we tend to, I guess, look to the majority in society, and if your needs and interests are different to those, that's quite hard to make sense of, especially as maybe a young person. And then I suppose the next piece here is around shared experiences. And I think, everybody, autistic, neurotypical, all value kind of shared experiences or shared interests within friendship. And I think, again, what might come up, what we'll continue to look at, is that, I suppose, preferences around what experiences you might enjoy could be very different between autistic and neurotypical people. Did you want to come in there at all, Amanda, or do you want me to keep going? And
No, I was just probably saw me nodding my head, but no, I was really agreeing, and I was just thinking about, like, even the piece on mutually gratifying. And for me, for example, meeting, say I haven't met you since, God, I think it was about 2 Christmases ago, but
yeah.
still I feel like we're still great friends and all that, and I know that we are. So for me, I wouldn't need to have a strong, we think about mutually gratifying. It was lovely to meet you, we had a great chat, and we spent a little bit of time together with, the larger group, but it's not a thing where I need to see you every single week, and I'm sure you wouldn't need to see me every week, but still we still have such a good strong bond of friendships. I'm even thinking that piece on mutually gratifying, like, it's so interesting, like there's the definition of friendship, but then it is still so individualized for everyone's needs and everyone's experiences. So I'm really, I know the slides that are coming up, so I'm really interested for everyone to like see them and hear you speak. So I'll go mute again to let you continue. So much.
Thanks a million, Amanda. Yeah, we're going to be getting into all that. So I guess, a little bit deeper into, what neurotypicals might say is the different levels of friendship. So, at the bottom there, having strangers. So this might mean someone you know of, that you might have seen them around or heard of them, but you've never maybe met them. Acquaintances, so I know you, so I've maybe met you once or twice. And then it goes up to kind of casual friends, so someone you like, a close friend, maybe someone you understand, and an intimate friend, someone you connect to. And the reason I'm going through this, I suppose, is not to say like this is how one does friendship, but I suppose it's just to maybe even give an example of this kind of social rule, maybe, that neurotypical people tend to adhere to quite strongly. So we know that a big difference between autistic people and neurotypical people is that neurotypical people tend to have quite rigid, maybe social rules, that also tend to be a little bit ambiguous, or unwritten, or quite hard to know of, because they're never discussed explicitly. So I guess, what can happen as well, and I know you've spoken a bit about this before, Amanda, in our conversations, where you know the neurotypical person in the friendship might be categorizing somebody within one of these 5 levels, not consciously maybe, but maybe subconsciously, where people who are autistic or maybe other neurotypes don't have this kind of structure laid out in their minds. They might see friendship a little bit differently. So I suppose it's another way where a little bit of a mismatch can happen.
Yeah, and I think even from, and this is the piece we were chatting about previously. I was saying to Rachel that we were chatting obviously about, tonight's presentation. I was saying, like, for example, when I was younger, probably, I'm not that old now, but probably not that far in the past either. I would have assumed that when I was friends with someone, we were like great friends, like really close friends. And maybe I've only met them a few times, and maybe from their perspective, they might have seen me only as an acquaintance. But my mind was saying, oh, when you're friends with someone, you're like all in, like they're your deep closest friend. And especially when I was younger, and we were just chatting about this just at the start of the call, I would have had, say, experiences as a late teen, a young adult, where I might have thought I was like, had this great group of friends. And it wasn't that they were unkind or anything like that, but I thought we were like, deep in the friendship. And then suddenly, say, a big, maybe a life occasion for me came up, say a birthday or something. And then in my mind, I was expecting, say, with the way where I would give them like the great present, or I would think hopefully it was a great present and a card, and be like all in for the celebration for the birthday, and they'd invite me along, and it'd be really, really nice. And then when it would come around for my birthday, and again, I'm not a huge, if you know me well, you know this, I don't often go out too much because I find it kind of overwhelming. But for my birthday, I might go out. And then when it would come to my birthday, I used to say they disappeared. I don't know where they went. My friends disappeared, or they might give me a very slight, oh, happy birthday, what did you do? But it didn't seem that they were as close of my friend as I felt that we had been. And now I can look back, see, and at the time I'd be like, oh God, was that something I did? Was it something I said, or things like that? But I can look back now and see that actually I think I was not and again, it's not that I suppose I wasn't understanding that non-autistic people sometimes can have this kind of very different view to me, which I know now to be true, to how I understood, say, the social world, which would make sense, is that I'm autistic, and those individuals, I believe, at that time were not autistic, or are not
Yeah.
autistic now. So for me, I had a different view of
Yeah.
what the relationships were, and I didn't really understand back then that people that aren't autistic may view friendships differently, or not even friendship, even understanding, I suppose, a social relationship and what it actually is. So for me, I found it really helpful. Even it was actually years later, somebody said to me in passing, oh, such and such is an acquaintance. And I was like, oh, like your friend. And she was saying, no. And I was an adult at this point. And I was saying, your friend. And she was like, no, acquaintance. And I was saying, like, I've been through university. I'm doing a master's at the moment of speech and language. And at the time I was saying, I really have to look back, and now I can, for myself, even from a self-compassion perspective, understand where for years I wondered what I did wrong. But actually, I didn't do anything wrong at all, and they didn't do anything wrong. They just saw the relationship as, say, an acquaintance or a casual friend, whereas I thought we were like the ultimate closest friends. And it was just, again, that I think it's that piece and double empathy. Just for me, maybe I just saw the relationship differently, and perhaps they also saw differently, and neither party was wrong. It was just a social communication, I suppose, miscommunication, perhaps.
That's it. And I think that's an important piece, that neither party was wrong. But I think what happens is, because neurotypical people form the majority in society, the presumption is that the neurotypical way of doing things is the correct way. And then that has an impact then on someone as a neurodivergent person in this friendship, in terms of how they see themselves. Because if you're been told this is how it's done, and you see lots of people doing it that way and you're doing it differently, you can't help but, you know, I suppose, feel that that's a negative rather than the neutral kind of thing that it is. Um, okay. So then we come on to, this was taken from a piece of research that came out just recently this year, and it was a review of kind of all of the available literature, asking autistic people about their experiences of friendship and what they see as the meaning of friendship. So this piece here is specifically around kind of the meaning of friendship, and we'll see here, it's very similar to all of the kind of the neurotypical ways that we've been thinking about friendship, but there are some very distinct things that kind of stand out to me a little bit. So the first one, they would always look after me. So I suppose this is referring to, that autistic people often mention that they, when they're looking for a potential friend, they're looking for someone who would support them, help them, when they need it. So I suppose that is something that's really important for autistic people that isn't always mentioned, maybe, in neurotypical kind of friendship. It would come up, but I suppose for the fact that it's kind of a prominent theme here, I think says a lot, maybe about autistic friendships. The second piece here is they actually understand. So this was really important. And I think, you know, it makes sense that this is important for autistic people because it's not that easy to find somebody who actually understands. Where for neurotypical people, you know, most people probably understand them most of the time. Where here, you know, autistic people were talking about finding someone who really gets them, finding trust, finding respect, acceptance, and you know, even being able to unmask in front of someone, being totally yourself. And that was a really important part of friendship. And again, you know, it's not to say that neurotypical people don't find this important, that they're understood by someone, but I guess, you know, maybe for autistic people that's a little bit harder to find, just again because of that neurotypical majority that we live within. So the next one there is kind of to grow, to become friendly. So I suppose this is referring to, you know, autistic people who spoke about their friends being people that they have known for a long time. You know, they might be maybe family friends that they met and kind of have been relationships throughout their life, or you know, somebody that they met that took a little while to maybe get close enough to that they feel comfortable with them. Again, I think this is quite similar maybe to autistic or no, to neurotypical friendship. I mean, in the sense that you know, the last slide we looked at those levels from strangers to acquaintances to casual friends, etc. But I guess it seems like from this research that it might be a less rigid social rule and more so around feeling comfortable with somebody. Um, then the next one here is around kind of people like me. So I suppose this is maybe linked quite strongly to they actually understand. So here they're talking more explicitly about actually meeting other neurodivergent people or autistic people who are similar to them, have similar interests, similar things they like to do. And yeah, that was very important within friendships. And then the last one there, which is kind of linked again, so they like the things that I like. And I think, you know, what comes up a lot, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, Amanda, but having kind of a shared passion or interest can be, you know, a very positive thing, you know, in any friendship, absolutely, but maybe particularly in autistic friendships, given kind of how passionate interests tend to be for autistic people. Would you say, Amanda?
Sorry, I have to mute. Yeah, absolutely. Just even hearing you speak through each of those, you know, the piece that says they would always look after me, what that reminds me of for myself, I was thinking, yeah, I think that's the way I am actually, even in friendships, is that for me, it's not that I'm looking for someone to be my caretaker. It's more that they would, as in, accept me. It kind of links to everything. They accept me for who I am, but also where I might say, for example, if I was in a very busy environment, like my colleague Neve, who'd be a very close friend of mine, and if I was in a very busy social environment, she would actually always naturally just check in with me, be like, oh, do you want to go out and take a break, or are you okay? And it's not that she's my caretaker, but she cares enough about me to consider for a moment that actually you might find that from a sensory perspective, this is a little bit overwhelming. Or often for my, like, again, Neve again, they actually understand me. So if you think about, I think I mentioned this to you before, myself and Neve laugh about it often. Like, Neve is neurotypical, I'm autistic. And we had an event recently, an event, we were going to something recently, and I had said I would meet her at the train station. I'm from Mayo, by the way. I'd meet her at the train station in Dublin Tara Street, and she was coming in from where she lives to meet me. And again, every time I think or process, I'm always going to think autistically. And she had texted me to say, oh, I'm running late. I'll be about 10 minutes late, but go on ahead if you'd like to, or something like that. So I thought, I read it really literally, and I thought it said, get on the train, I'll see you there in 10 minutes. So I got on the train, even though my lovely friend Neve had gone across the city, and then arrived at the train station, and I was already on the train. So she got to the train station, everything. But as I got on the train and as it started to move, I realized that I had got, what I think she actually meant was to, if you wanted to wait or whatever. So I messaged her then, I said, oh my gosh, I'm on the train, I don't think that's what you meant. And then she said, it's totally fine. She said, a great example again of the double empathy theory, that I understood what I said, you understood what you said. We had like a miscommunication, and we laughed about it. Again, I did feel bad about it afterwards. She was like, please do not. But the thing is, she understood me and understood my perspective, and that was really valuable to me. And again, we started off as colleagues, but became this grow to become friendly, became very close friends. Again, she's not autistic, but we'd be very similar in our friendship and in our, hopefully, you know, that's the way I would describe myself, in our kindness towards other, and our empathy and things like that. And then we like the things that I like. And again, as it happens, and very lucky for me, I get to work for the best charity in the country, an autistic-led charity, but I also get to work with incredible colleagues like Niamh. And we have the shared passion of like doing our best for the community, but also we have a shared interest in autism. So many of our conversations outside of work involve autism. So for me, that's what a friendship is to me. And it's just, and that's either with, whether it's with an autistic person or not with an autistic person, you've really hit all of those points. And that it's just really that they value me for who I am and that I can value them. And it's just a mutual acceptance of each other exactly as we are, and without judgment. I think it would be the best way to hopefully paraphrase it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I knew I was going to start coughing, didn't I? Excuse me. Okay. Thanks a million for that, Amanda. It's amazing how you were able to hit on all of those points there within that one example of friendship. Fab. Okay, so here, I suppose we're taking a little bit of a closer look now, maybe at that comparison between neurotypical friendships and autistic friendships. And I guess what might be a helpful way to look at this is as kind of maybe two different cultures. So, we accept that friendship is going to be different across cultures, and that's just kind of the fact. And I suppose we can see being autistic or being in the autistic community as its own distinct culture and a different way of approaching things compared to the neurotypical culture. So again, it's that neither way is right and neither way is wrong, but it's that what can happen is you might have a mismatch. And that doesn't mean that you can't be friends with the neurotypical person, as Amanda has demonstrated, or a lovely friendship with Niamh. But I suppose it's that you'll both perhaps need to be good at communicating your needs, your wants, and being understanding, accepting of the other person. But anyway, I'm jumping ahead. So I suppose some typical maybe features of neurotypical friendships might be kind of quite frequent interaction and frequent in-person meetups, where autistic people might not kind of want to or not need to have as much in-person interaction in order for the closeness to actually be retained. So like Amanda said, we haven't seen each other in ages, but as soon as we got together to start planning this webinar, it was nearly an hour in before we got any planning done because we were just catching up. So our closeness didn't change just because we hadn't seen each other in a year and a half. For neurotypical people, they might like to meet in larger groups, and they might have in general maybe a larger number of friends. So they might have lots of casual friends, quite a few close friends, and a few kind of intimate friendships where for autistic people, they might have a preference for a small number of close friends. Again, these are kind of broad generalizations as well. I'd like to point out every person is going to be totally different. These are just maybe themes that might come up among the two groups. So yeah, and this was another piece is around kind of neurotypical people tending to have that more indirect style of communication and interaction, maybe not always saying what we mean, presuming that people will pick up what we mean or make assumptions, and where autistic people might prefer a more direct and honest communication style. And from both points of view, the other is going to be a little bit jarring perhaps. So yeah, might just take a little bit of work together. And neurotypical people might follow kind of very specific unspoken social rules. So I think where this is most evident might be kind of in teenage female friendships. And I know I've worked with quite a few female autistic teenagers, and just the kind of trying to get your head around teenagers' social rules is worse than rocket science, because it's not written down anywhere. Everything is unspoken, but the rules are very, very strict, but nobody knows exactly what the rules are. Very, very challenging. But even that, outside of that extreme example, can happen throughout life. Another couple of things I didn't mention there around autistic friendships might be kind of the preference for asynchronous communication. So, not being in the moment back and forth, but rather, say like a text message. So I'm able to send a text to Amanda. She's able to take her time to process it and respond when she wants to. That might be a preference for autistic people. also kind of that piece around kind of shared activities and interests, and that really maybe forming a big part of a friendship as well can be really lovely for autistic people. Okay, great. So let's see. I suppose, yeah, before I move on to the next one, I guess highlighting again that it's not that either way is right or wrong, but it's about kind of the mismatch. And Amanda has kind of touched on the double empathy problem, which we're going to have a little look at here now. So the double empathy problem is a theory developed by Damien Milton. So I suppose the idea is, it's kind of what we've been saying over the past little while is, you know, it's not that autistic people have difficulties or deficits or whatever way you want to say it with communication. It's that there is a mismatch between an autistic person and the environment, you know, usually a neurotypical person in the environment. So autistic people have strengths when it comes to communication. They might also have challenges when it comes to communication, but similarly, neurotypical people also have different strengths and different challenges when it comes to communication. You know, so we can say that neurotypical people struggle to communicate in an honest and direct way, for example. You know, so it's just a different way of seeing things and looking at it and saying it's not one person's fault versus the other, but it's more so the mismatch when the two come together that can create the challenge. And again, you know, autistic people being a minority neurotype in the world is what can, I suppose, lead to the negative impact on autistic people, because you know the neurotypical people get to very comfortably be in the majority and not be questioning their views or approaches because they are the majority. I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir here of everyone kind of coming to something like this, but I suppose just to really reassure everybody that, you know, because what we're going to be coming on to talk a little bit about is compassion for yourself in those moments that are hard, remembering that, you know, you've been taught to blame yourself when things go wrong within communication because you are in the minority, but that doesn't need to be the case. You know, your approach is just as valid as a neurotypical approach. So here, just to kind of highlight some of the social expectations that neurotypical people might bring to a friendship. So they might have the expectation that someone would be available constantly to them. So, you know, quick responses to text messages, answering the phone if they ring you, you know, being available to meet every weekend, things like that. And, you know, it might be perceived as you know, offensive or upsetting or whatever it might be if that expectation is not met. They might expect kind of conformity to a social group. So might expect you to behave or to dress or to you know, have similar interests to the kind of dominant social group. They might expect an understanding of unspoken social rules, which, you know, when it comes to style of communication, is not what autistic people tend to benefit from. It tends to be, you know, something more direct and clear is preferred. Where, you know, when it comes to social rules, there's nothing kind of direct or clear about them, unfortunately. And yeah, I suppose, you know, again, neurotypical people might have that tendency towards indirect communication and will also then in turn expect that same style of interaction or communication from their friend. And if that's not given, if the style is a little bit more direct, it could be considered impolite. And probably that's kind of on the lower end of things that it could be considered, unfortunately. Yeah, anything, I don't know, Amanda, if you wanted to come in there on anything or
I could probably give an example. I just, as you were saying it, it was like, I suppose, having me reflect. I remember being in, I think it was college, and just thinking about like the unspoken social rules or like conforming to a social group. I lived in college. I lived in like student like apartments near the university, and we lived fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you look at it, I happened to, so the allocations of where you lived in whichever apartment was by the apartment complex. So it wasn't that I decided who I live with, but fortunately or unfortunately, I seem to have found myself in an apartment with a group of friends that had gone to secondary school together. And initially, I thought anyway, it seemed to be going very well. And I remember at one point, Looking back now, I can see that this was like the head girl of the group of friends that I happened to find myself in. She had, I suppose, the habit of asking, or maybe not asking, that the other people in the friendship group, that they would clean up after her, and they would like whatever our shared duties were as housemates, that they would do her share as well. And I remember at one point, for whatever reason, some of the people in the apartment weren't available or weren't there. And again, I looking back now, I was always providing myself a lots of structure. I always had like would work at night time in like a restaurant. I was always working lots and lots. I wasn't just at college. I was structuring. And looking back now, I was identified later in life. But looking back at college, I always made sure I had something going on all of the time. And looking back now, I know that was me providing myself a predictability. So I was very busy all of the time, whereas they might just be obviously resting or socializing. I was always very busy, and wherever the other girls had been, then all we'd say the other shared jobs, like going out with the bins, the dishwasher, all the pieces were, you know, piling up. And I remember the person said to me eventually, "Oh, you need to be doing this as well." And I said, "Oh, I do this. I go down to the shared bin with the bags. I empty the dishwasher. I do all the things." And she's like, "No, no, you're not doing my share as well." And I was saying. I was like, and my mind is so like, but that's not very fair. And I was saying, oh well, no, but I have really done my share, and I've done the share for the girls there and here. Like I've done as much as I can, like, and I'm working. And she was getting really like annoyed. Well, I didn't know I was annoyed. I because I can't read face, but her face looked different to what it would normally look. And I was like, I'm not really sure. She goes, look, this is the rules. She literally was like, this is the rules. You're supposed to do my share as well. And I was saying, but why? Why? And then I just said, I'm sorry, I don't have any more energy to do your share as well. And then unfortunately for me, that not understanding, this was an unspoken rule of the house, or the apartment, that everybody was supposed to do everything for the leader, even though I didn't understand that there even was a leader. I was just doing my own thing. That it ended up then that it was, luckily it was towards the end of that particular year, that I was kind of not so much blacklisted, but it was like the social rule then was in place that I wasn't conforming to whatever was supposed to be there, even though up until this point I thought we were all great friends. But obviously I can look back now with a more educated eye. And that's why I really do appreciate you going through all the pieces on friendship. Because even for me, I'm like, it's nearly like a therapy. I can look back now and see retrospectively, someone has just said the words there. I can look back retrospectively and say, okay, well, that's what's happened. And that's why, because I didn't conform to, and I don't know if any of those individuals were neurotypical or neurodivergent, but generally I would believe, looking back, they were possibly neurotypical, but I could see why, because I wasn't picking up on all those nuances and what was actually really going on. And then when I gave it a hard no, I was very direct. I was like, no, I really, like, I was kind, but I was like, I really can't. I was being logical. I was like, look, I'm working here. I mean, I'm in the college. I was trying to be as compassionate with my response, but I was like, I really can't do any more than what I'm doing. And then unfortunately for me, I was blacklisted essentially. For I'm assuming, again, for that reason. Again, it was still tolerable, but it was definitely not as cozy, we'll say, for myself. But I was glad to finish and go home for the summer. So just for my own understanding of that, even in a very minute one example, I can really
Yeah.
feel like that's really accurate for my own experience.
Yeah, yeah. So interesting, isn't it? That like there's so many little kind of social rules to to unpick there. Like the fact that there was a head girl of the group, and
Mm.
then that you have to pick up, well, what are all the things that are expected of me now?
It was like a micro system of rules that I didn't even understand were happening until the other girls weren't doing the extra. And it wasn't any major pieces of anything, but it was just that person just didn't really seem to do any of the house chores or any of that. And I was genuinely working so hard outside of even the college context and the home context in our environment, that I was like, I don't have the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was very interesting for myself to learn later, looking back now, 20 years later.
I know. Yeah, and I'd say, you've processed a lot of this, Amanda, I know, and
Yeah.
what I'd say, it takes time, and it's not easy, I'd say, at times either, to be thinking through all of these kind of
No,
tough.
and that's why I think, and people hopefully will appreciate the slides come up around self-compassion. I find it really great to understand friendships now through that lens of like understanding that it's not any, and it's not that that person was wrong. That was just what was going on in their social friendship group, and this is what was going on for myself. And it didn't make either of us good or bad people or anything like that. It just meant, for me, it's really helpful to look back and say, well, that's what that was about. I can close the door on that now and not never worry or wonder about it again. Because for myself, I would often have, what's that word I can never say? Ruminated. Hopefully that
Oh
sounded
yeah.
correct. I would
Yeah.
ruminate and be like, was that the reason or was this the reason? And now I'm
Yeah.
like, well, actually, it was just two different I suppose, neurotypes colliding and having those miscommunications, and maybe for myself not picking up on the differences, but also from the other person's perspective, not understanding that I had differences, and not again making either person like the bad person, just different.
Yeah. No, well, fair play to you for standing up for yourself, though. That's not an easy thing to do.
I mean, to this day, I'm not a fan of the dishwasher, so there was a bit of touch of laziness there as well, I have to be honest. But again, I did as much as I could do, hopefully.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so I suppose we're going to start talking a little bit about how all of these experiences might impact somebody throughout their life. You know, there's idea of living as a minority group in a world that is set up for the majority, and all of these kind of small or, you know, sometimes larger misunderstandings or, you know, rejections or whatever they might be. So I suppose we're going to get in a little bit more now to the impact of that. So it's when we're going to start talking a bit about trauma. So again, if you don't feel like delving into that today, you know, nobody will take offense if you leave us now and come back to the recording at a later date. So I suppose we'll start by looking at kind of what is trauma, because I guess sometimes when we think of the word trauma, we're thinking about you know, this part in the green here, what we call the big T trauma. And I guess, you know, for any type of trauma, it's a typically medium to long term emotional impact of a distressing event. And it could be one of these two types, or, you know, sometimes somewhere in between, because nothing is quite as simple as two categories. But when we're thinking about big T trauma, it's the things that are typically kind of one-off, very significant events. Things like, you know, being involved in a natural disaster, war, childhood abuse, a car accident, you know, those kind of very big significant events where you were perhaps at a very serious risk of harm. And so I suppose the way that we maybe, you know, when our understanding of trauma was developing and we were looking at it was, you know, often we were looking at war veterans coming home and we were looking at, well, they were at risk of physical bodily harm. But actually, you know, a trauma response can occur when there is a risk of harm of any kind. So it might be physical harm, but it might also be psychological harm, sexual harm, emotional harm. Do you know? So I suppose there's lots of different experiences that can result in a trauma response. And everybody is very different. So two people could have the exact same experience, be sitting right next to each other in this experience. One person will have a very significant trauma response on an ongoing basis. The other person might cope quite well and not have any ongoing trauma response. So it's very, very individual and depends on lots of different factors. So I suppose what is traumatic for one person might not be traumatic for the next. So I suppose we don't ever judge based on the situation. And you know, it's judged based on the response over time. So I guess what we're talking more so about today is this piece in the blue, which is called small T trauma. So these are things that might kind of seem to be minor events, but that are repeated over time. Very often with small T trauma, they're interpersonal events. So that means they're events that happen between two or more people. Often it's the accumulation of these events. Like I said, they might be repeated over time. They might not be exactly the same each time, but they might have the same kind of theme. And you know, as those build up, you know, you might be more likely to experience a trauma response. And while you know, big T trauma might be associated with kind of classic PTSD, some people who experience many small T traumas might develop something called complex PTSD. Now, I guess today, you know, we're not concerned with specific diagnoses or definitions or anything like that, but I just wanted to give you a sense of, you know, what we typically see of as trauma are these big T, big, huge events that are, I suppose put us at risk, our body, our physical health at risk. But actually, these small T traumas can be just as impactful in terms of our emotional experience in the long term. And I guess we'll have a look in a minute about what that might be for autistic people within friendships. But I guess generally what a small t trauma might be is maybe being invalidated. Maybe your caregiver not being totally attuned to your needs and not meeting your needs, not in any big way, not neglecting to feed you or bathe you, but maybe neglecting your emotional needs a little bit. And it could be things like exclusion, maybe in school. It might not be explicit physical bullying, for instance, but it might be ongoing being excluded from groups, not being invited to parties, having funny looks thrown at you, and those kind of small rejections, exclusions, invalidations over time, that can really impact people. And I suppose what these experiences do is they do change things in our brain, and they change the way that we see the world, they change the way that we see ourselves, and they change the way that we see other people. And that, of course, can have a very significant impact then on life going forward. So I guess, yeah, when you're hearing the word kind of invalidation or rejection or exclusion, sadly, we know this is something that autistic people experience a lot more, say, than neurotypical people would. They might be at a higher risk of experiencing these small t traumas throughout their life, and kind of then have the impact of that going forward. Yeah. Will I keep going there, Amanda, or did you want to come in now?
Yeah, keep going, because I have a piece to say, but I think it'll be more relevant in a few slides' time, I think, in relation to this. Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
So I guess when we're thinking then specifically maybe of autistic experiences within friendships and how those might be traumatizing, there's a very wide range of experiences. So I was talking a minute ago about maybe being invalidated, and that might be your autistic ways of being invalidated. So the way that you communicate, the way that you move, and the way that you interact with people, all of that being seen as less or not good enough, or whatever might have happened. And like I said, maybe being excluded from social groups, not feeling that sense of belonging when you are within social groups, always feeling that little bit outside. Or then I suppose we move along to maybe the more explicit experiences, like more bullying, maybe more explicit, maybe verbal, interpersonal bullying, something like that. And I guess maybe on a more severe end, if you like. And remember, I said just because an experience is severe doesn't mean it's traumatizing. Just because if an experience is seen as minor doesn't mean it won't be traumatizing, because everybody is different, and none of these experiences are minor, really. But on what we might consider a more severe end of the scale would be what's called interpersonal victimization. And if this is something you're, maybe interested in learning a bit more about, Dr. Amy Pearson does a lot of work in this area for autistic people. We're going to have a look at her work now in a moment, or at least a small part of it. So I suppose interpersonal victimization is when someone that you know well maybe victimizes you in some way. So that might be a very close friend, it might be a family member, it might be an intimate partner, a spouse, someone who I suppose is within your close circle, someone that you trust. And I suppose when it's someone that you trust, that can be where it has a very significant emotional impact, because that trust piece is broken. So it might be something like bullying, but it could also be forms of abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, physical abuse. So I suppose that, abuse within a close interpersonal relationship. And again, like these other experiences, autistic people are at a higher risk of interpersonal victimization. And that's not to say that this is the fault of the autistic person, but it's that people who are abusers might target particular people who they might see as more vulnerable. So I guess it's a very, very serious issue. And like I said, Dr. Amy Pearson and her colleagues are doing lots of work in this area. But I guess, look, like I said, it's a very wide range of experiences that we're talking about here. And, you know, any of them or any combination of them could be traumatizing for anybody. And I suppose here we're talking about autistic people who might be at a higher risk of coming up against these experiences. So I'll move on and talk about maybe the impact of that. Did you want to come in here, Amanda, or maybe the next one? Up to yourself.
No, I'll pop in after the next piece if that's okay.
Next piece,
Thank you so much.
yeah, great. So, talking here about the impact, I suppose this is maybe specific. Well, it's, you know, at the same time it's not. It's somewhat specific to autistic people, but also possible for anyone who's experienced this type of trauma to respond in these ways. But these are some of the ways that we'd often see maybe autistic people responding. Sorry, I'm moving the square around to like get out of my way. There we go. So I suppose first one is masking. So we know, you know, that masking is a response to trauma. You know, it is a response to being continuously perhaps invalidated, excluded, rejected within social groups. And I suppose we know what a detrimental effect masking has on autistic people's mental health, their sense of identity, their sense of well-being, and also here, you know, actually the ability to be able to make meaningful friendships going forward. Because what we often hear from autistic people is, well, you know, I can make a friend while I'm masking, but sure, they don't know the real me. So is it a real friendship at all? And you know, that can be even harder than not having the friendship in the first place. You know, feeling that they don't know the real me, they don't even like the real me. That's really hard. Another possible outcome for somebody might be that they avoid future potential friendships. And I suppose this is, you know, and these all are ways that people might try to protect themselves against further harm and further hurt. And I remember that I said earlier that trauma impacts how we see the world, how we see other people. And so naturally, if we've had all of these experiences, we're going to see other people as dangerous, as risky, as you know, unsafe, I suppose. So one way that we might avoid any more harm to ourselves is by avoiding potential friendships altogether. For other people, or you know, for the same people, all of these things can be true at once. It might be that they accept poor treatment from people. I suppose that internalized ableism might kind of be at play here, and believing that you are the one at fault for those miscommunications or for that rejection. And so you going forward, you accept that poor treatment, and you know, maybe don't fight against it again, maybe to protect yourself from, you know, because people who speak out tend to be targeted perhaps even more. Fawning here is a really interesting one, and I think it's really strongly linked to masking. So fawning, it's, you know, everybody or a lot of people might be familiar with kind of the fight, flight, and freeze response. And so, you know, fight might be where in response to an anxiety provoking situation, you might become quite angry or lash out at somebody. And freeze, where you kind of can't do anything and kind of say nothing, and maybe it might be similar to that shutdown experience of autistic people that autistic people often have. And flight, where you avoid and run away from a situation. Where fawning is, you know, very relevant to these interpersonal situations where you might go along with whatever somebody says. You know, so it's really putting your needs last, and just, you know, I suppose going with whatever the person is saying, and not standing up for yourself, not advocating for your own thoughts or needs. Not trusting your own judgment. So I suppose this might be around, you know, you might meet a new friend and it's very hard for you to tell if this is someone to be trusted or not. So it might, you know, again, it might mean that you find it hard to get into friendships because it's hard to make that judgment around, is this person going to be a good friend to me, or is this somebody I need to avoid? And because of all of those negative experiences, it's hard to make sense of who is safe and who is not. And yeah, I suppose that's linked to that one, not being familiar with healthy friendships. So, I suppose if you're not familiar with healthy friendships, then it's impossible to spot a healthy friendship when you see one. Um, and then self-blame, I suppose, yeah, this is kind of, something we've touched on here already, but, really blaming yourself for those negative interactions that have happened. And I guess what we're hoping to I suppose foster today is that sense of self-compassion and moving away from self-blame, and seeing both autistic and neurotypical ways of being as equal, and being able to advocate for your own way of being, your own preferences and styles and communication and friendship. um, yeah, so look, these are only a few ways. The impact of trauma is so wide reaching. We could talk about, the physical impact of trauma, the emotional impact, and I suppose what we're focused in on here is how it might impact future relationships. And these are some of the ways that might manifest itself.
Yeah, I just thought that was so, what I really like, I suppose, Rachel, the most about all of your presentation tonight is that I find it really helpful for me to refocus my lens on the past, but also going into the future in the way that, like, I even myself in friendships. So just to reflect back on friendships where, you're talking about the small t trauma.
Yeah.
For me, they would be, for example, I literally, as you're talking, it was like being transported back to the past. When I was a teenager, I'm originally from, I suppose, a place called Castlebar, and there still is a bowling alley at Castlebar. And I remember standing on like the sidewalk, and one of the girls that I thought were like, again, and it wasn't their fault and it wasn't my fault, I thought we were like really close friends, and because I just thought we were, I don't know why I thought we were, but I thought we were. And she had met this new boyfriend, I think we were 15 or 16 or 17, and she was telling all of the friends about this new person that she had met or whatever. And I thought, oh God, this will be great, we're all going to the bowling alley and I can't wait to hear her news. And as I was walking along, I was like, God, they're walking really fast, like I can't really keep up. But eventually the girl turned around and she just roared really loudly, stop following us. And then I just went, oh my God. And then I remember just standing there going, am I following them? And then I was like, I thought we were all going to the bowling alley. And then I just went, oh my God, walk back to the school and just hide in the loo or something. And I remember that was the first, it was like a rupture. I just went, oh my God, I've been BFFs with these people since September, and maybe we weren't actually BFFs at all. And have I actually been following these people around and bothering them or annoying them? But they've always been super lovely to me. And then I suppose to me, that was my first time ever. And I was older now going, oh God, am I misinterpreting what's really going on? And I often used to feel confused in friendships, but this was like, I mean, I think it was in fifth year. And I remember saying, oh my gosh, have I actually been bothering these people for the last 6 months of the year or whatever and not realizing? And then that was the first time then that I started to really be like, okay, you need to be really careful now, because there's something, because again, I wasn't, again, for anyone watching, I didn't go for an adult autism assessment until I was 39. So that was many years before, after this. But I remember going, okay, you have to be really careful anymore when you're going to make friends or have friends. You need to kind of create a checklist, so you're going to know that these are your friends and you're not going to bother people anymore. And what happened then from that point forward was, if I did have a friend, or and again, looking back, I can never really be sure were they friends or not, even now. And I mean, they weren't unkind people, they were really nice people. And I have to keep saying that there was nobody ever, and that girl wasn't being unkind. I can see from her perspective, I wasn't her close friend, and she wanted to tell everyone the details about this new lovely person she'd met. And I was just like, yeah, let's go to the bowling alley. So I can understand from her perspective, and I'm very compassionate for that as well. But it meant going forward, I felt that if I had any friend, that was great to have a good friend. It was great. They were my friend, because obviously there was something about me that meant I wasn't a good enough person, or I needed to try extra hard to be an extra good person. I always remember my dad, he used to, in his lovely, gentle way, say, Amanda, you give out so much kindness to the world. He said, but remember to keep a little bit back, because he said, if you give it all away, I know I used to say, he still says it now, even to Haley, my daughter, he'll say, you always have to keep a little bit back, because he said, if you give all the kindness away, you have no kindness for yourself. And I was like, no, Dad, these are my friends. And he said, that's lovely that they're your friends, but you have to be a friend to yourself as well. But I did spend then, I feel like this is the Waltons now, I'm telling you my life story, but it meant for me, and we're talking about in the context of the impact of the friendships, is that when any time then if a friendship, as I would say, just disappeared, I don't know where it went or where did they went or what happened, I would always be transported back to that moment, standing near the bowling alley going, and the girl going, stop following us. And me going, I just remember I was wearing like this really cool, I thought, denim jacket. I was just holding the collar of the denim jacket going, oh my gosh, I think I've been following these people around for a year. And then I just went, go hide in the toilet at school. And I walked back to our secondary school, which was down the street. But it meant then going forward, I had a great difficulty not trusting my own judgment. I would avoid as many new friendships as I could. And again, it would occur, and even up until in more, not recent years, but a few years ago, I would have still had gone into what I thought were friends and were deep, deep friends, and then found out later maybe they actually hadn't been that kind to me, but for whatever reason I was thinking, well, you deserve that because. But knowing now that that was obviously a piece of around the self-blame piece, but also it's nearly like a shame when you know, or for me that's what I would feel about it, that when I'm going into these friendships and then things go wrong, I automatically would blame myself. But now, thanks to you being my lovely friend and having other lovely friends like Neve and Zara, in particular my SIM colleagues, because they're pretty incredible, seeing what a good friend is and what kind people are, that's really helped me see that, okay, they were really difficult moments. And again, that girl, I meet her, she's actually a psychologist now, would you believe? I met her a number of years ago, randomly in Mayo, and she was like, oh, I haven't seen you, and like, absolutely lovely person. So the point was, it wasn't that she was unkind, it was two different neurotypes, not even misunderstanding, but trying our best to gel and mix. And that was her moment. She was telling her great story to her friends, and just for that particular moment, she just wanted to have just those close people, and it wasn't an unkindness, but for me it did have an impact. But now as an adult, and having again great role models and friends like yourself, Rachel, means that I now know what a good friend is. But it also, I would still say I'm probably still protective in that I just keep a few friends now still, because I don't think my heart could take it again. But it also just means I really genuinely want to say to you that I find your presentation this evening just so helpful for myself as a professional as well, but also as a parent and also as an autistic person, to really reframe what has happened in the past and to support myself into the future. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries. Well, thanks for sharing that, Amanda. It's so hard, isn't it? Oh, the world is a tough place sometimes. Okay. So we're moving to more lighter areas now, I think, and thinking about moving forward. So I suppose, look, I imagine that some people watching this are relating to some of what we're talking about, and I guess thinking, right, well, what now? And I guess it's not super straightforward, but let's talk about some ideas for moving forward. Oh, there we go. So, sorry, I need to move this little square in my screen around. I can't find a good spot for it. There we go. Right. So I guess in terms of moving forward, there's lots of things that you can do. I guess if you do feel as though maybe you really related to a lot of what we've been talking about this evening, and maybe you are feeling a long-term impact of, or maybe these experiences are still happening to you, or maybe they're more so in the past and more recently you've been in that more self-protection mode, whatever might be the case. It could be helpful for you to explore that a little bit further in some kind of a safe capacity. So I guess there's some different ways that you might do that. For some people, it might be that they speak to a close friend that they have now, or a partner, or maybe it's a family member, or maybe it's a professional. Seeking out some therapy to process what you've experienced. What I would say is, if seeking out a therapist to talk about these very maybe specifically, not specifically even, but I guess it would be helpful to have a therapist who's either neurodivergent themselves, or perhaps has a very deep understanding of neurodivergence and autistic culture. Um, so yeah, and I guess as part of that, and Amanda's going to speak a little bit to autistic self-care in a few minutes, but I guess exploring your autistic identity might be a nice place to start, because I guess exploring what that means for you if you haven't already, and I don't just mean going and getting an assessment and being formally identified, but actually having a space to talk through these life experiences and putting them into the context of being autistic, and having those make a little bit more sense. I know a lot of people probably do that themselves anyway, but if you were able to find a space to talk that out, or even journaling, something like that, reading things that other autistic people have written, watching videos. I mean, you're here this evening listening to Amanda talk about her experiences, so hopefully that is helping to put things into context. But other ways to listen to other autistic experiences will, you know, maybe a combination of some of these things might help to put everything nearly back into boxes and make it make sense for you. Kind of have, sometimes when we're talking about trauma, it's like, you have that one drawer or cupboard in your house that like you never go near because it's an absolute mess and you never know what you'd find in there. But actually, when you go and take each thing out and have a little look at it, and then you have everything out of the drawer, and you put it all back in a neat and organized way, you no longer dread that cupboard in your house. It's a cupboard that you're quite happy to open, and it's a cupboard that you know what's there and you understand it and you can go and grab it when you need it. So unpacking those experiences, making sense of them and having them there to frame yourself and your experiences. And then I suppose self-acceptance and self-love. I think, sometimes self-love can seem a little bit too far for people. You go like, oh God, I couldn't love myself, but maybe self-acceptance seems for some people a little bit more achievable. So I do think it comes maybe a little bit in this order that we have them listed. So starting first by exploring your autistic identity and understanding it, then maybe coming to accept it, embrace it, and love it. And there's lots of other parts of your identity that isn't to do with being autistic, and exploring all that might be important as well. And then I suppose autistic culture as well, understanding that. So I guess that's understanding the wider autistic community, learning from other autistic people, seeing your experiences as an autistic person in the context of autistic experiences in general. It can be very validating, I think, to see that I've had these experiences, but I'm not the only one, and it's actually part of my culture to see the world in this way and relate to people in this way and relate to my interests in this way, etc. So I suppose there are some of the areas that might be helpful to explore. I'm not saying one way or another is best to do these things, but like I said, some ideas might be speaking to someone close to you, speaking to a therapist who is either neurodivergent or very knowledgeable about neurodivergence, doing some journaling, reading things written or made by other autistic people or otherwise neurodivergent people. Yeah, I guess there are some of maybe the key things that might be helpful. I might ask Amanda to come in and talk a bit about autistic self-care.
Yeah, I think like everything you said there would be exactly, I'd have the same sentiments. And even the piece on exploring autistic identity, the way that I started to do that after I was identified was that's just a graphic that I pulled from my own social media. I started to draw that little character, so she or he, the way, whichever way you like to interpret the person. Like for me, I just dressed him like in a dressing gown and headpiece and everything after, allegedly having a shower. Now they're in that self-care mode. But for me, I started to draw Aughty, and I started to draw about what I thought about life, because what up until I suppose really I was identified, I always had this feeling of if I could just try a little bit harder, that I'm going to fit in somewhere. And I always had this kind of, not like a voice in my mind, but like this searching feeling of, okay, if you just keep searching, you'll find out where you belong. You'll find out why the friendships have kind of either disappeared or fallen away. And maybe if you could find out what that reason was, then maybe then you'll feel like I could just be myself now. And that's how the Aughty character started. But I found for myself, the more that I would draw, and again, I was very lucky to have a platform that I could share it with online. And then I was even more lucky that the incredible community members that we have would comment or share or talk about their own experiences. So for me, that was really going into the autistic culture as well, and learning about that I wasn't the only person, for example, that would rewatch the same movie and would still do it today. Things that I find very helped me feel like me. We were chatting on the call just before you all joined. I was showing Rachel and my lovely colleague Bridget. I was drawing Mr. Potato graphics. I like to draw graphics, and I always like to do things better than what I did before. So for me, that's self-care. And I'm not saying we should all now sit down this evening and draw Mr. Potato graphically. But for me, I was trying to reconceptualize something I had drawn about 10 years ago. And a friend had said, I downloaded this from your website 10 years ago. And I was like, my God, I could do that better now. So for me, it was like, oh, I'll do that. And that for me, it's almost like, I'm not going to say play, but for me, it's very much like I just totally relaxed. That's what's good for me. And what I find in those moments when I'm doing things that make me feel the most like myself, I start to reflect, or a thought will come into my mind and I'll reflect, but I feel very grounded in those moments of self-care. And I can look back and I can say, and it's just that piece that Rachel mentioned there about self-acceptance. I can look back now and say the pieces of my life where I found there was difficulty, say in friendships, I can look back now and say, you know, Amanda, thinking about Dad's words about that piece around kindness, you know, maybe it wasn't always my fault, maybe, and it wasn't, I'm not saying it was the other person's fault, but maybe there was just two different types of people trying to be friends or trying to understand each other's perspectives of the world. And maybe it's okay that that was difficult, because in a way, as unfortunate and maybe as upsetting as it was at the time, I have learned lessons from that, in the way that I now know when I'm making friends or having friends with other people, I have to, for myself, understand what's really, you know, if you're thinking about what is a friendship or what does a friendship mean to the other person, it also means for myself that I accept myself for who I am. I accept that I'm a 42-year-old woman that likes to draw graphics. I draw characters online or randomly draw a Mr. Potato on is it a Tuesday evening? But I know for myself that makes me feel good. And now if I do have difficulties in a friendship, or if, as I said, the friends just disappeared, now I'll say, well, okay, it's not going to automatically always be your fault. Let's think what might have happened there. And now, as Rachel said again, I could chat to Rachel, I could chat to Neve, I could chat to all my wonderful colleagues and friends, and as I am, I could talk to my friends that I grew up with, and I could talk it through with them. And it's great for me now to know, you know, I could really talk it out. And if I did need to talk to somebody like a counselor or to an incredible psychologist like Rachel, that's something that I would do. And I would say to you, as an autistic person, if you've had those friendship difficulties, or even if you find it difficult to have that self-compassion for yourself, that you really do deserve it, that you're a really lovely person that has potentially, if like myself, you've had difficulties over the course of your life with either friendships falling away, or maybe sometimes you potentially not having the kindness, you know, given to you that you've given out to the world, that you do deserve that kindness now, and you absolutely do deserve to have that self-care for yourself, and have no guilt about having self-care. It's really important. I think that's a thing that I grew up feeling like I didn't deserve to be kind to myself, because I had those moments in friendships where I would blame myself, and I would carry that nearly on my shoulder going, why was it that I got that wrong? Or why did the girl turn around and say, stop following us? I can look back now as an adult to see she was a child too, and she was excited about a moment in her life that she wanted to tell specific people, and that was okay. So for me, it's looking back and having that. But what's been really, really helpful, and again, I know Rachel talked in that, is this piece around autistic culture. And now I can look and say, okay, I had difficulties growing up. I didn't really know where I belonged, but I know where I belong now. And as I mentioned earlier, when I used to have that chattering of, you just keep searching, you'll find, I know where I belong now. I belong in the autistic community. I know that friendships for me will look different to what they might look like for my sisters that aren't autistic. They might look different for my friends that I have close friendships with, that would have, they would be non-autistic friends that would have other non-autistic friends, and they go out and they socialize. And I don't ever feel like I absolutely must be with them. I go with them when I feel like it, and when I don't, that's okay. And they accept me for who I am, or as I am. And that's a really great thing as well. So again, that's just a snapshot of things that I've learned, like saying no, setting boundaries, having that alone time, where in my case, I could draw Mr. Potato. I can info dump about all the things I love about autism, or having cups of tea, or buying travel mugs, which is my new thing, and drinking tea as I work. So just things like that. But more than anything, to be kind to yourself, that you deserve that, as my dad would say, the kindness that you've given out to the world, reflect that back in now and look after yourself.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, even that, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Amanda, but I think um having that piece of self-acceptance actually allows you to engage in some of these self-care things that maybe are not typical self-care. You know, like if you weren't totally accepting of your autistic self, you might not be allowing yourself to rewatch your favorite movie for the 400th time, or you might think like, oh no, I shouldn't be having alone time, I should be going chatting to my friend, and you're nearly like shooting yourself in the foot because they're not the things
Exactly.
that you need. Yeah, just another thing that came to mind. All right, I just had a little quick look at my watch there and realised how much
Ooh.
I've gone over time. But anyway, we just have one more slide really to go, and then a brief piece. So, um, This is a really brilliant resource, and I mentioned Amy Pearson earlier, and this is something that she developed with some of her colleagues. So you have the QR code on the screen there that hopefully will work. I did test it, let me know. Where you can get this resource around kind of noticing green flags, orange flags, and red flags. So basically noticing signs that your friendships or relationships are healthy or maybe not so healthy. So I've just screenshotted a piece of kind of the green flags. So like, what are good signs within a friendship or relationship? So here's a quote kind of just saying, we argue and I'm not scared. So that, you know, you're able to have those difficult conversations with a friendship and not worry that the friendship is going to end over this. You've got each other's backs even when things aren't great. So though, you know, you work through the kind of hard times, I suppose. You know, you can laugh and joke together. There's another piece that was cut off there, but it's about I can unmask, you know, so it's back to I can be myself. I don't have to mask when I'm with this person. I can truly be myself. And I suppose you know, take a look at that resource yourself and see, you know, the indicators of maybe the not so healthy relationships. And I suppose they kind of categorize the red as I suppose abusive relationships, and the orange as not abusive but potentially not very healthy. So it might just be, you know, if that's something you struggle with, maybe as a result of your past experiences, it could be even just a little checklist for you to go through to make sense of maybe a new friendship that you're getting into, or maybe an existing one that you're not totally sure of. There's something else I was going to say there. No, I don't think so. I suppose something that's not mentioned here, but I think is important, is to be able to have open conversations with a friend about what your needs and preferences are within the friendship. And I suppose the green flag would be that they're really open to this and interested in it and looking to find out other ways that they can be a good friend to you. So that it feels that you guys are meeting each other halfway. And, you know, maybe it's that sometimes they're meeting you a bit closer to where you are, and other times you're meeting them a bit closer to where they are, but that it goes both ways, that you're both I suppose, yeah, being conscious of the other person's preferences, but at the same time, you know, as Amanda gave that lovely example earlier, not judging when those little mishaps do happen, because they always happen in friendships, and probably particular in those cross neurotype friendships. But having a joke about it, having a laugh, and just having that real sense of comfort together, that even though we had this bit of a misunderstanding, we know that things are going to be okay, and we still have our friendship and it's solid. I suppose, look, these are kind of just some key words to leave you with that we've kind of touched on throughout. You know, autistic self-care, really exploring for yourself what that means for you in a very non-judgmental way. Autistic culture, how can you get maybe more involved in autistic culture? Would that be a helpful way for you to, you know, explore more of your past experiences or start to have more positive experiences within friendships? Make sure that your values and wants are aligned with whatever friend that you're engaging with. Compassion for past and present self. I think it's easier said than done, but hopefully, you know, some of what we said today was helpful around framing those past experiences. And then finally, you know, what might be a practical step if you're looking for maybe friendships that are with other autistic people, who you might have those kind of natural understandings with. Joining maybe an As I Am adult support group could be a nice place to start, especially because a lot of them are online, so it can be quite an easy way to kind of start to reintroduce yourself into friendships if you've been protecting yourself for a little while. Okay, I think that's us. Was there anything else, Amanda, that you wanted to?
No, genuinely, you've covered it all there so well. So thank you. And again, it was an absolute pleasure to co-present on such an important topic with your brilliant self. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, really appreciate that.
There's a few questions there. Do you want to?
Yeah.
I'd say they would probably be better answered by yourself as a professional than myself as a personal opinion.
I think they could benefit from both.
Do you think so? Okay.
Yeah. So one that came up a few different ways is, how do you deal with a friendship or what you thought was a friendship going away when you don't have an explanation?
Hmm. That can be very, very hard. Hard to get closure, I suppose, on something like
Mm,
that. I guess it depends. Do they mean how do you deal with that emotionally or practically, as in do you go to the friend and look for a follow-up or to have a conversation? Um I guess it's very situation dependent, I would say. And there's no probably right or wrong. I'd be
mm,
inclined to say, I suppose, mind yourself,
Mhm.
check in on how you are feeling with this. Is there, somebody that you could go to who you really trust to chat it through with? Um, you know, I suppose, yeah, maybe it comes back to some self-care, and maybe you won't ever know what happened. And if there is a way to find acceptance with that, I suppose. But I guess it's drawn on what you have, whether it's another close person to chat to or some self care that you can engage in. Um, but I guess there's no simple answer. It's a really tough
yeah.
situation, actually. Yeah.
I think I'd agree with that. And I think from my own lived experience perspective, I would say, and this is something I have to keep doing myself, even outside the context of friendships, is don't jump to always blame yourself
Yeah.
for the reason, say, a friendship falls away or something doesn't work out. Sometimes even the reason the friendship falls away might have absolutely nothing to do with you, or the fact that, you're an incredible person might have nothing to do with you at all. They could have something else that has happened in their life or in their personal circumstance you may have no knowledge of, or they may not have ever shared with you, that you may never, as Rachel said, you may never find out the reason for that friendship falling away. And sometimes it's a lesson to learn, or maybe something to try and learn, that sometimes you have to make peace with what you don't know. But in particular, as Rachel said, I'd keep focusing on looking after your own self, your mental health, your physical, emotional, building up yourself to be as happy as you can be, if that makes sense. That's what I would be doing. And learning that you might have to accept never knowing, because that's something that I've had to learn in the few friendships that disappeared. I've
Mm-hmm.
had to learn that sometimes I'll never know. And that's something I just have to get on with. But for myself, it means that I look after myself, even in those difficult moments. I say, well, okay, whatever has happened, I know that I did my best. And if this friendship has, as I say, disappeared or fallen away, then perhaps I have to keep reminding myself that it could also have nothing to do with me. People have life events that maybe I don't know about that have occurred, or something else has happened, or maybe they're distracted by something else. And perhaps we could be friends again one day. I don't know. But I know that for now, I may not find the answers I'm looking for. But in the meantime, the thing I can positively do is look after myself, my mental health, and really, again, lean into what makes me feel happy about myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another question that's come up a few times is asking um, how to talk about a recent diagnosis with friends, how to bring this up to friends.
Mm, yeah. Uh, I guess all these things are going to be situation dependent, so you don't want to hear that from me. But I guess maybe thinking about who you want to share it with first. So minding yourself, maybe choosing one friend to share it with first, to, someone maybe you trust, um, maybe having some information. So sometimes it can be helpful to have, if you've come across a video, for example, or an article that you've really related to, having something like that to pass on to your friend to say, like, look, this really explains my experience. If it might help you get to see where I'm coming from. um it might help you as well to even just take some notes for yourself around what you'd like that person to understand about you, because I guess you know being autistic is it's about every part of a person. So what would you like that person to know? Do you want them to know, like, this is why I might find it hard to respond to your text immediately? Or do you want them to know, this is why I need you to communicate more clearly with me? Or, what's important information for them to have? And if, yeah, you have any resources to send them to that they can maybe even just process in their own time. Um, those would be some things that just come to mind. I don't know if you have any other Awesome.
Yeah, I think as well, if you felt that you could, and I would absolutely, be really aligned with what Rachel suggested. And then you could also like redirect them to like the As I Am website. There's so much fantastic information there. If they're saying, I know for myself, I would have had after I told, so again, I'm on social media myself, so I would have said to people on social media I'm autistic, and genuinely I was incredibly lucky where everyone was really positive. But there were one or two people in my personal life that are like, oh, I don't think you could be autistic. You're not like your son Connor. So my eldest son Connor would have high support needs. And they were saying, oh, Connor is non-speaking. You're not like Connor. You couldn't be autistic. And again, I took that with compassion, saying, well, there's a person that doesn't really understand clearly what it means to be autistic, but also has maybe spoken before they've had time to think about what they're saying. So for me, it's compassion, trying to give them the information. And again, sometimes some people may, for whatever reason, may not be able to accept you for who you are. And that's a them issue. It's not you. You're just wonderful just as you are. So for me, it's learning to sometimes again accept that you cannot control how other people will react. You can only prepare yourself to give that information. And again, I'd be as best you can, identifying that they would be a safe person to give this really wonderful and beautiful information about yourself, that you've done your own little piece of research thinking, I think that this is a person I can tell this wonderful information to, and that they will be able to accept me. And I remember, like for myself, I'm always processing pieces of information. For some people it's just a piece I'm processing, and then coming back and then reflecting, going, yeah, actually, now that you say it, and I was on the As I Am website, and gosh, when I think about different moments we've had together, yeah, I really do see this. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me. And again, some people will be like that, and some people might just take a little bit longer, and some people may never get there. And again, that's the piece around the control piece that you won't be able to actually control. But what you can do is, again, keep looking after yourself, and keep knowing that, you belong to a wonderful community that accepts you for who you are.
Mm.
Okay. And I have a gut instinct that this will be every situation is different one. But are there any tips that you might give to someone who's been struggling to take a relationship from the acquaintance stage to a friend stage? Is there
Mhm. Okay.
anything out there?
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Taking it from acquaintance to a friend. And I'm imagining that this person is talking about a neurotypical person that
Yeah.
they have. Okay. Um, yeah, I guess if we look at it from the neurotypical point of view, it might be around spending more time together, or kind of sharing more information. Not if I suppose discussing things that are more personal to yourself, but I guess that's sharing what you feel is you're happy to share. I guess, God, that's a really hard question to answer.
Mm.
I guess what I'd be wondering is, what is it about this person that means that you want to have a closer friendship with them? And maybe building on that a little bit. Like, is it that they're very kind? Is it that they're similar to you? Is it that they have a similar interest? And maybe building on that. So if it is they have a similar interest, maybe inviting them to do something around that interest. If it is that you think they're, I don't know, a very kind person, I don't know, maybe, you know, being, obviously you're kind back to them already, I'm sure, but I guess, I don't know, finding those things maybe you have in common that is making you want to be closer, and building on those in whatever way possible. Um, but I guess spending time together, or yeah, spending time together might be a helpful one too. Would you have any other insights, Amanda?
Again, I would just be checking in, like for yourself, just checking with the other person, maybe what they might like. And again, we can only give like some information and advice on this particular question because it's so nuanced and
Yeah.
it's so particular. Like, we don't want to say, oh, go in and tell the person you want to be best friends or something like that. I'm just saying you have to also just, and this is the thing I have to always remind myself, what could the other person possibly be thinking about? The friendship is an acquaintance, what level? I don't even mean level. If the person's neurotypical, that may be how they're, as Rachel explained, that may be how they think about and process, we'll say, social relationships. So just maybe consider, if they're not autistic, they might be looking at this in a very, and I'm not saying that this is always the case, but they may be looking at the friendship or the acquaintance as in a very particular way. So really possibly try, if you can, to consider how they might be looking at the the social relationship, and how they may think about it, and how they may wish for it to develop or for not to develop. And then again, in everything, as Rachel said, every time, keep minding yourself and looking after yourself, because I always think it's like a minefield, the social world, or that's how it feels like to me. There's little explosions going off everywhere, and some of them I notice, some of them I don't. Sometimes I can see what's coming, sometimes I can't. But the thing I can do all of the time is look after myself, protect myself, and have lots of compassion for myself, and keep thinking as well, from the context of like social battery, all of these wonderings and hopes for all of these friendships, they can wear you out. So keep looking after yourself and really delving deep into that piece on self-care, whatever self-care will look like for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've gone nearly half an hour past 8. So I think we'll end this here. But if you do have any other questions, you can send them into the info line or to our email at support@sam.ie, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And this recording should be up on our YouTube by the end of the week to be able to watch back. Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you to everyone watching. I really appreciate you spending the evening listening to ourselves chat away about friendships. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks, you
I
too,
get
Mama.
going.
See ya.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.